The Trump administration is reopening the debate over race and college admissions. The Justice Department sent a notice to employees looking for lawyers to work on a new project examining intentional race-based discrimination.
And while the White House does not confirm or deny the existence of potential investigations, the Department of Justice will always review credible allegation of discrimination on the basis of any race.
And California is one of 8 states that ban the use of race in admissions policies to college.
Well, joining us now to talk more about affirmative action and the new immigration policies or proposals coming out of the White House is Vincent Pan with Chinese for Affirmative Action. It's interesting, I did a story with you earlier this week on affirmative action at UC, and how many people in California didn't know that California basically banned affirmative action several years ago.
Well, it's more than several years ago, 2 decades. So we've lived now since 1986, since the passage of Proposition 209, without affirmative action in public education, public employment, and public contracting.
And what has the effect been?
Well, we've seen a number of things. We've seen a loss of hundreds of millions of dollars that would have gone to minority and women-owned businesses. We've seen a decrease in some minority groups in terms of admissions to UC. And then we know in employment, it's probably been a much slower path for both women and minorities to rise in the ranks of civil service.
But it's interesting to note that a couple of years back, when some lawmakers in Sacramento, Latino and black lawmakers, said maybe it's time to bring affirmative action back. Now, if you were looking at the template of California politics, you would say, well, everybody would agree with that, but in fact, it was tabled.
It was. I mean, I think affirmative action is a really complicated issue, and we've seen polling where you ask people if they even know what the word means, and many people don't. That particular effort was also targeted at affirmative action in higher education. And I think it ran into a lot of confusion about different problems we face around the scarcity of higher education. And I think it was also very clear that for some members of the Chinese American community, they were focused on that issue rather than addressing concerns, important concerns around diversity.
Yeah, I think we have that poll. Can we show that poll, what the numbers were? Because in the Bay Area and stuff, we were asked about this, and it was like 80% of the people said that they were ready to go for keeping the ways things they are the same. Basically, they feel like it's a meritocracy versus a affirmative action model.
Well, you know, we've seen a lot of different polls on this, and it kind of goes both ways. The key part of the question has to be like, for what purpose? So, you know, should race be considered as a factor to reduce discrimination? The polls always say, yes, race should be considered to reduce discrimination and promote diversity. But when you leave that part out, people think that, oh, you know, it would be used to perpetuate the ongoing racism and sexism that we have.
You know, as we look at these numbers, it's across the board. I mean, the black African Americans are the biggest supporters, and we have Hispanics. Asians are not. Why do you think that?
Well, I think when people think about it in the context of higher education, you know, they're dealing with a number of things. You know, higher tuition costs. Right. The number of
out-of-state tuitions, international students coming in.
Out-of-state admissions,
there's
a scarcity, and I think that pressure drives people to think, well, we shouldn't tinker with it. But I think the reality is that there can be a very smart proposal to actually expand the number of UC slots for everyone, and then making sure that groups that are underrepresented have a fair shot.
Let's take a look at the shifting American and immigrant psyches. Your organization began in the 60s. And that was the time of great moves in the civil rights movement. And then we evolved into the Rainbow Coalition, where everybody was on the flag and we're pushing together. Are the new immigrants coming in from around the world feeling that same way?
Well, I think it varies. I think it's important to note that for many people from anywhere who come in new, there is a period of understanding the best way to advance civil rights in America. And I think in America, what we find is that any group that's discriminated against does much better linking up with others that are discriminated against. And I think, look, with the Trump administration, you see the enduring strategy is to really scapegoat and blame immigrants and communities of color. So decide with them on an issue such as affirmative action, while they're at the same time trying to decimate immigration that makes our communities robust and whole. Would be a terrible mistake.
Final question, the president's new plan or the call for immigration to be based on skills rather than family connections, that's all, your feelings on that?
I think it's a disaster. I think that the way immigration should work is just keep families together. It should create a pathway to citizenship, and it has to protect worker and civil rights. And I think this other business of trying to both crackdown in, really with inhumane deportations and xenophobia has to be rejected.
Final question, do you think affirmative action is going to return to California anytime soon?
I think it can. I think it'll be up to the next governor to really push it in the context of growing and expanding the pie for everyone.
All right, thank you for joining us this morning, Vincent Pan.